probably having a better time than UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Even when he announced the election, the heavens opened up and his very expensive suit got soaked in rain. Maybe that was a sign from the heavens that it was not to be. Honestly, I think he has got, less chance of becoming the Prime Minister after the election than I have of winning the lotto over the weekend, given that was in the past and I didn't buy a ticket. That's the way it's looking for the Tories after many years in government and a bit of a revolving door of Prime Ministers. But what has caused this sudden change for the people of the United Kingdom to be anti-Tory? Some analysis on this. Thomas Scrimgeour from the Maxim Institute joins me. Thomas, kia ora. Good morning.
Morning, Andrew. How you doing?
Doing very well indeed. Now, the Tories are out. It's just, the election hasn't happened yet. Is there a mathematical chance that Rishi Sunak could turn this around? Is there any way they could stop the landslide, as it were?
Well, there's no mathematical chance if the polls bear any resemblance to reality. So I guess it depends on how much faith one puts in polling, but it's really looking pretty dire. Certainly it looks like it could be their largest defeat sort of in memory, really, looking like an absolute landslide.
Now, Keir Starmer, of course, leader of the Labour Party, it's not necessarily a vote of confidence in him, not that fancy a performance in the leaders' debate the other day, but honestly, all he needs to do is keep his mouth shut, and it's his. It's not necessarily a vote of confidence in Labour, or what do you think's happening here?
Yeah, certainly I think he's playing a kind of a play it safe approach to the election campaign. It's sort of his to lose, and so not wanting to rock the boat too much. I mean, as part of his time in Labour leadership over the last couple of years, he has brought the UK Labour Party closer to the centre. He's less of a radical figure than Jeremy Corbyn, who preceded him. But he was in Corbyn's cabinet and has sort of deliberately pivoted, at the very least, the messaging of the Labour Party to try and play it safe and not scare off voters. And it's working really well for him.
Now, Labour, of course, pivoting towards the centre, and the article that's going to be posted on the Maxim website, you've entitled it "Devil in the Deep Blue Sea," or Deep Red Sea, perhaps, if it's a Labour landslide. However, on the right of the Conservatives, Nigel Farage. Now he's the Brexit guy, isn't he? And making a bit of a surge in the polls, unusually.
Yeah, so Nigel Farage was one of the kind of loudest voices in the Brexit campaign, which was 2019, and so that's sort of what the Tories got in on the back of last election was just get it done, and kind of the voters were sick of that issue. But Farage was really loud in Brexit, and he's come back to a new party called Reform. Farage was over in America, involved in some American political issues, but he's come back making waves, and so sits sort of to the right of the Tories on a few issues. And so the title of the article, "Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea," is that Rishi Sunak and the Tory party have opponents on both sides. Then they're having to kind of fight them off in both directions.
It seems, there's a lot of elections this year, and it seems generally that the world is swinging right. Fortunately, we're not on an actual pendulum. I think that would make me travel sick. However, it seems that is the way that most elections are going. French election announced recently, and various other indicators of that. Is this the mood of the moment? Is this the way the world's heading? Not want to get too fatalistic on it, Thomas.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends. I mean, the UK are kind of different here in that they are swinging back to the Labour Party. So I guess there's some consistency in the moves, but I wonder whether it's sort of a rejection of the status quo, whatever the status quo was. Most of the governments that are set to be scent packing, the governments that were in charge during the COVID years. And I think even if people supported the policies of those governments at the time, they do sort of evoke memories of a harder time where people were less satisfied. So they want something new. I mean, Indian Prime Minister Modi has just got himself back in as leader, but he's having to seek coalition partners for the first time. So again, it's not sort of a universal swing to the right as much as it is a rejection of whatever the status quo was during those COVID years.
Like Winston Churchill being kicked out as Prime Minister after the Second World War, I suppose we want to move on for those people that were in charge when we went through that terrible thing. Certainly happened in New Zealand last year with the Labour Party going from a record high to a record low. Having said that, though, I suppose warning signs for us here in New Zealand. I'm not sure anybody voted National last election. They just voted against Labour. That seems to be, well, in opposite terms, what's happening in the UK. That's only going to get you so far politically, though. National needs to up its game between now and the next round, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, why I jumped off from the UK election is that the challenge the Tory party faces is they don't have a story about who they are and what they've done.
Yeah.
They're saying, oh, look, we're going to get inflation under control, but they were in government when inflation went up, and so they're sort of solving their own problems. So National have become the largest party in this new government because people wanted a change and maybe a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
But that story doesn't get you very far. Next election, if inflation has come down, will people still want National? National kind of in their previous budget that's just been released, they're kind of trying to give a bit of the tax cuts they've promised, cut a bit of the size of government. But they haven't really communicated how far would they like to take that in the future. They've recognized they have constraints now and can't do everything. But what's their vision? Where are they marching New Zealand? And I think the UK situation is instructive. You can be kind of moderate if you want to be. Keir Starmer is running a moderate kind of brand, or you can be a big change. That's also a strategy. But you have to tell people what you're doing. You have to give them a story and then ask them to come along with you.
Yeah, back on track or let's get moving or whatever variation of that from the coalition partners, that's not going to cut it next year, especially if inflation eats all of our tax cuts.
Exactly. And I think, this was something that Jacinda Ardern was really strong at when she was campaigning in 2017, is she could cast a vision for the kind of New Zealand she wanted. Now, voters might like that vision. They may or may not be confident whether that vision could be achieved, but you could at least describe it.
Yeah.
But I think National has been a bit weaker on that. Can they describe their vision for a flourishing New Zealand and then chart the course to get there?
Of course, coalition partners complicate these things. You can promise one thing, but then that hits the cutting room floor when it comes to coalition negotiations. But hey, in order for the coalition to remain strong, they can't be blaming each other for the problems of government, which is essentially what happened in the first Labour government here in New Zealand.
Yeah, for sure. I think National having to rely on two full coalition partners makes their job a bit more complicated. But I think that's why casting the vision becomes even more important, because the risk is National's only brand is babysitting New Zealand first and ACT, that, they are the ones with the vision and National's just trying to hold it together without having a distinct story of their own. And so then voters will keep pushing to those smaller parties if they want a real story for what the government should be doing.
You kids stop fighting, don't make me come down there. Or, I mean, again, that's not necessarily a vote of confidence in that regard. I suppose having said that, though, Rishi Sunak is dog tucker. That seems to be the way things are going, at least for the government here in New Zealand. They've got time to sharpen their pencils. They've got time to come up with a better strategy than back on track, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think New Zealand voters are pretty confident in re-electing a government for at least a second term. We're not really keen on kicking them out after 3 years. It feels very short. So it's not absolutely urgent for National, but the risk is that it becomes harder and harder to cast this new vision the longer you wait. It's sort of easier to do the big, bold things early, while voters then are going to give you a bit of rope to see, are they really going to land this? Is this going to work? But as you kind of stay in government longer, people get a bit tired of you. You've been around for a while, and inevitably some minister or another will have a scandal. It happens in kind of second and especially third term governments. So you can't afford to wait forever, as that's a future problem for us to cast the vision. Yeah, certainly. And hey, looks like Rishi Sunak will be a cautionary tale for our history books moving forward, and let's see if governments here will learn that lesson early. Thomas, thank you for the work that you do. That article, Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, that's going to be posted on the Maxim website a little bit later this week, maxim.org.nz. But hey, good conversation starter. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's
It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.